feel like you're carrying this one.
I'm carrying this one? I thought you were carrying this one.
I'm going to start us off. All right, we are here. And I just want to say thank God that we're here because the eclipse happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised that we are here.
Yeah, I texted my whole family while it was happening. Is everybody still here?
Yeah, I think I texted you even like, hey, just want to make sure that you didn't get taken away.
I did say it was bright and lots of gold everywhere.
You did.
So for a moment, I thought I left, but no.
Yeah.
I actually went golfing during the eclipse. I thought to myself, what do I want to do during this eclipse? I want to be on the golf course. So I went out with some friends, and it was cool. It was like twilighty. It was kind of cool for a few minutes. It was. It was like double shadows.
It was.
And it was kind of like, ooh.
The shadows got really short. It looked like we were munchkins. It was amazing.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We took pictures of it because it was really funny. But I did laugh because when you told me you were going to go golf for the eclipse, I was like, well, if the prophets are right, then you are going to be swinging your way into heaven. And I think that's, yeah.
Yeah. I went golfing because I knew there was not going to be a rapture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So literally, that it's not happening, people. It's not happening.
No, I thought it was really funny because we just released the last podcast, and it was all about the prophetic.
Mm-hmm.
And then here comes this eclipse that's over America, and all of the prophetic words.
Yep.
And we had a friend that posted kind of a sarcastic comment about it's funny how God only cares about the eclipses that happen in America. And I kind of I laughed a little bit about that because it's real. I mean, like eclipses happen actually like every couple of years all over the world.
It's really mind-blowing how much, we get the whole world, especially here in America, when something like that happened, we think that the whole world is seeing it. Like, I was talking to somebody the night before, and I said, do you understand that it's only happening in this part of the entire planet?
Yes.
Like, the rest of the world could care less about this.
Yeah.
But we think it's the whole world. So it's just funny, the narratives and the words that we use and the ideologies. It's really entertaining.
Yeah.
I found it highly entertaining, and it wasn't shocking to hear different voices in America think this was it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But we're here.
We're here.
We're here.
And it was cool by all means. Yeah. I mean, like we had a blast, like everyone out, they like canceled the schools here, which is funny. They did an e-learning day. And so all of the kids, I think in my neighborhood.
I heard it's because they couldn't figure out how to not let the kids look at the sun.
Yeah, but we've done that for years.
I know. I don't understand.
Okay.
Anyways, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I think they were all at my house, in my neighborhood at least. They all came and grabbed the glasses. And so all these kids are looking up at the sun, and it was beautiful. It was fun.
I was blocking it, and then I moved my hand really quick just to look.
Because you didn't have glasses?
No. I was on the golf course. I had sunglasses. But I did it once, and you could see it.
See it?
So I told the guy, hey, do this really quick. Basically did what they told you not to do.
Burn your eyes just for a second. Yes. Just a little damage. Just a little damage. It's fine.
Might have damaged my eye. I don't know. We'll find out.
When you have to go to the eye doctor later, and it's fine. Yeah.
Oh, did you look at the sun? I did.
I did.
For half a second.
For half a second. No. But it was really a cool thing to be a part of. And also I loved, we talked a little bit about it, and you said something like, what would it have been like if you would have lived, years ago?
5,000 years ago.
And to see this take place and have no knowledge or what's happening, and then all of a sudden this shadow comes over the earth. Like, what would you think?
Like, imagine that. Like, you had no idea what's about to happen.
Yeah.
So you can see why the spirituality piece of it becomes like, oh, the gods of the heavens are upset or whatnot. And so I can only imagine what that was like. And so you can see why there's so many spiritual conversations around eclipses. Mm-hmm. Because I can only imagine thousands of years ago, what was the other option?
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't
Aliens.
explain this phenomena.
Yeah.
So, but obviously now we understand that this is kind of a normal orbit pattern.
It's a normal pattern.
Of planets and moons and suns and all that. So
that God put into orbit and knew that it was going to take place. Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
Did you notice the temperature change?
Yes.
See, I did notice that. I think you're the one that told me that.
I did. It was amazing. Really? I think it also was cool to see what it would be like without the sun. which is actually kind of scary because it was very cool and it dropped like a good 10 degrees. And you were like, wow, this is kind of creepy a little.
There's some cool footage of cities that were right in the path going black.
Yeah.
And like the lights are popping on the skyscrapers and then they turn
off.
My favorite one is a satellite flying obviously around the Earth and it's looking at, it looks like the black hole, but it's where the shadow is on Earth.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it, but it looks like this black hole on Earth, and it's really cool. So if you haven't seen that, you should go look it up. It's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So all of this leads into, we had a conversation about the prophetic.
Yes.
And I even think like, we had some great comments and feedback from it, which is always fun to see different people's opinions, and it's great. That's what we want to do. We want to stir up conversations here. So I think for me, I would love to see why you think the gifts are important and why people shy away from them, and dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that conversation, we could do so many episodes on that.
It's
So,
huge.
but for today, I think just looking back on the episode we did a couple weeks ago, and we put out a couple little social media clips, and one of them in particular that seemed to get the most traction was around something I said in regards to people that are prophets or walk in prophetic gifts specifically, if they're not connected to a local church or to a community of people, that for me personally, I have a really hard time listening or receiving what they have to say. And I understand that's a pretty hard line, but I think for me personally, just at a point in life, I'm so convinced that if you are isolated and alone, the potential for you to end up in really slippery spots spiritually are way more likely. And so that generated a ton of conversation. And some interesting conversations came around, or comments came around. Well, what do I do if I don't have a community of people? Or can I do it online? Because I live in X country and, all these. So there's so many variations. And so I think, for the record for people, I think there are so many variations. They're probably complex to answer each one. But I still do believe that we were not designed to be alone. We just were not designed to be alone at all as humans. Forget spirituality for a minute. We just were not designed to be alone. Then you throw spirituality into it, and then you throw the human part of it into it. That, to me, emphasizes even it needs a greater emphasis on, like, I can't be isolated in this gift. So I think some of the conversations we can have today are around, well, what do you do when cultures or churches or spiritual communities aren't available? What do you do in those situations? And why do some spiritual communities have space for spiritual gifts and other ones that completely shut it out? So there's a lot of nuance in this conversation around that. So is there one that you want to go after first?
Well, I think for me, maybe because of personally what I've gone through and seen the miracles in my life, and I know that is a personal debate that happens, and my experiences, yada yada yada. I know I've had those debates with people, but I think for me is, why do we limit it? Like, I understand that it's safer in the quote unquote, like, controlling it, not having to even trust God in things of believing that he still does miracles. It actually is easier for my human brain to go there. But is that the safer route to go, or is that like just the easier route?
As far as believing in miracles?
Yeah, and believing in the prophetic still happens. And
yeah. I think there's probably a couple of primary reasons. One is personal experiences. So if you have a bad experience, you're more likely to question it, and in the extremity, say it doesn't exist. And I think some of it is maybe what you were raised in, or even what you were taught. And so I think as we look at different cultures, different church communities or spiritual communities, whatever you want to call them, everyone has different experiences. And we're obviously in South Carolina, and something that I've ran into more here, I've experienced it more here than I did specifically on the West Coast, was this idea that the spiritual gifts don't exist. They died, they stopped.
yeah.
And so let's take a few minutes and lay kind of a framework, a groundwork for those that may be going, how come some churches or some people or some leaders don't emphasize the gift? Well, one of the primary reasons, it could be a theological thing. They don't actually believe they're meant for today. They actually believe they stopped. So that theology is called cessationism. And cessationism was originated primarily by a man named John Calvin. Now, a lot of people may not have heard of this man, but this man has shaped a ton of Christian theology, even to this day.
Interesting.
And so people that are devout behind John Calvin are called Calvinists, and they have 5 points of theology that are very, very specific. But John Calvin was having a difficult time. Now, this was centuries ago. Was having a difficult time with the Catholic Church at the time. And what's interesting to me, when you look at the story, the Catholic Church was actually seeing miracles take place.
Yeah.
They were seeing the action, if you will, of the Holy Spirit in miracles, in healing, in prophesying, all these different gifts that we mentioned. And which is so kind of interesting to see, look at the Catholic Church today and its own journey through this conversation. And if you study Catholic Church at all, some eras, they were all about the gifts, and other eras they weren't. So they've actually kind of gone in and out of it over the years. Yeah. And their theology has flexed and changed over the years to some degree. But at this time, John Calvin was having a difficult time with the fact that the Catholic Church was walking in the spiritual gifts, seeing the spiritual gifts take place, but he could not stand their teaching. And one of the dilemmas was there's a scripture in the Bible where Jesus says, if I don't do miracles, don't believe my teachings. Don't believe what I've said.
Yeah.
And so in some regard, the Catholic Church kind of lived by that. Listen, our doctrine, our teachings are right. Mm-hmm. They're accurate because there's miracles taking place. So John Calvin was trying to figure out how do we separate these two, because he felt deeply that their teachings were way off base, which eventually led to Martin Luther putting the 95 Thesis sometime later on the castle door. So you have, I think that without getting too deep into that, you have this reality that at the time the Catholic Church was walking in the gifts. And there's a man named John Calvin, a brilliant, smart theologian, brilliant man, one of the smartest in modern history. And he was having a hard time with reconciling miracles along with the teaching. He's like, can't do this. And so he developed what is called cessationism. And he developed a whole branch of theology that said the spiritual gifts died in what's called the apostolic age.
Wow.
Which is the idea of the apostles that followed Jesus. When the last one died, the gift no longer existed.
Just poof.
And the idea was that the gift were to help get the church going. But once the church is going, it doesn't need anymore.
Wow.
Now, some people will loosen it from the apostle to the first 300 years of the early church. So they kind of petered out or kind of phased out over the first 300-ish AD. But I think the main point I want to bring today is the response to no gifts was because there were gifts. And they didn't like the teachings, which really brings up a lot of things. Because I think, let's just talk today.
Yeah.
There are people that are walking in the gift, but their theology is really off.
Yeah.
It's very extra biblical. It's very it doesn't follow the tenets of the faith, the fundamental cardinal truths of our faith. And so you have this dilemma that's still evident today. And so that's why I keep going back to, if you're not in a place of accountability or community, if you're not in something like that, then that's really deeply concerning, because then you can keep doing life going, look, miracles are taking place.
Yeah.
I can prophesy. But it doesn't actually justify the other parts of your life. So that's where things get really complex and interesting. So you have cessationism, and the opposite is continuationism.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Which is the idea of the spiritual gifts continue today.
Yeah.
They never stopped. They never died. They continue today. And so, and to be honest with you, both theological frameworks have valid, meaning if you agree with it, valid arguments for them.
Yeah.
I am not a cessationist.
Okay.
I'm clearly, definitely the gifts are alive today. Mm-hmm. I have seen way too much. I have experienced way too much to even remotely believe that the gifts are dead. Yeah. They are fully alive today. But I do have a lot of thoughts and opinions around where they can get unhealthy and abusive, et cetera. And that's kind of what we addressed a little bit in the last talk.
Yeah. I mean, because when you say that, the scripture that comes up of like that there's people casting out demons in your name and different things. And and then also we talked about it, I think, in the last podcast as well, but like people doing miracles and they were getting upset. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's also a hard thing for people to swallow, is that people can still walk in gifts even when their theology is messed up. Mm-hmm. But I do think that's why I think the last podcast that we did was so important, was so that we could discuss what character and the importance of character and the importance of being in community where people know you and know the shadow sides of you so that they can call you out. Because even the most anointed people fall on a regular basis or even have, weak points, shadow sides, whatever you want to call them. So
Yeah, it's interesting because as a leader, I would say it's easier to lead an environment that has no spiritual
I would
gifts
think so.
than it is to lead an environment that has permission for spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
And so if I were to just kind of remove the theological basis and just from a leadership perspective, it's just way easier because it's very interesting leading environments and people. And I think that's also another point that's worth making is I think for a lot of people out there that are very passionate about this, and again, I don't know the actual numbers, but I would say a majority of them have strong opinions on spiritual gifts, whether they're for today. They never have to lead an environment of people that walk in the spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
They're only thinking about their gift. And how come my church isn't accepting the gifts that I walk in? And I'm like, yeah, there's lots of nuances in there, but I would say maybe you've never actually had to lead an environment where a bunch of people are walking in, quote, the gifts.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you look in the scriptures and you see Paul constantly giving order or instructions. Hey, this is what you do in these situations. Hey, instead of this happening, do this. Because it is a little bit of like trying to, I don't want to sound too negative or too crass, but it's like trying to herd cats. You're like, I'm like, I don't, okay, what do you, no, don't, and that's the hard part of being a leader in environment, where spiritual gifts are active and important. And believe like, oh no, we believe this is for today. But it's a challenge to lead it.
I couldn't imagine.
It's messy.
Yeah. I mean, anytime, and you could take it out of the church context so that it doesn't offend anybody that listens to this. I mean, you could go into even like going into mountain towns. I mean, anything that has to do with spirituality and new age, there's just an attraction of all different belief systems and opinions, and it just attracts people. And I think that happens too. I mean, there's a desperation of experiencing God in such a beautiful way that we've seen, but there also that attracts all different belief systems, all different kinds of people. And so, and having to pastor that, I couldn't imagine. I mean, like, what would you say? Could you explain a little deeper of why you think that's hard?
It's hard because, well, there's so many layers to why it's hard. It's hard because let's say you have 10 people doing it at the same time.
Yeah.
Let's just paint a picture. You have 10 people in a gathering prophesying at the same time, and they're different from each other. It's like, what do you do then? Like, who's on and who's not?
Yeah.
And then you have the tension, and this is where I feel this tension a lot. I have people in that room that have no idea what's going on. So my heart's like, I want to help pastor them and help them to at least have some framework. So this was probably like 6 months ago at studio. We had a moment in one of our gatherings where it was clear, just felt like God's presence was really strong. You could just see it on the people and you could sense it. And it felt like one of those just beautiful moments that felt little more than other ones.
Yeah.
And I remember going, there's a bunch of people in this room that have no idea what's going on. And there's some in this room that are like, we've been waiting for this our whole life. You have all the spectrum. So I remember I got up and I said, I would like to just know how many of you have never seen this before.
Wow.
And people's hands went up. And interestingly, most of the hands were the ones in the back rows. And then I said, how many of you, it's been a while. A bunch of hands went up.
Yeah.
And how many of you, this is your normal. And my whole point in doing that was for our church to go, there are people all over the spectrum here. So sometimes we can get so focused, and this is delicate because you're not wanting to limit God.
Yeah.
But we have to remember, like, you're not the only one in the room. If you really are part of a family or community, there are other factors to have in mind. So depending on the leader, some leaders can handle way more messier situations or more chaos or more like what they think. But again, my definition of order could be different than your definition of order.
Yeah.
So that's the other dilemma. It's like, okay, so I know what order looks like for me, but for you, like you feel like that's control or vice versa.
Yeah.
And some people have way more threshold for chaos. They're like, oh, this is beautiful order right here. And I'm like, this is chaos. So some of it is leadership styles as well. So that's a factor in there. And so I'm hoping that allows people to think a little bit more outside of just them walking in a gift.
Yeah. I also wonder if we could branch out with the prophetic only being for Sunday. Because if we were walking in these gifts that we feel like the Lord has given us, and we feel like we can only give them in a Sunday context, then that I think also brings and contributes to the chaos a little bit, because you're like, this is my only outlet. So you're like having to give instead of actually using it in your everyday life and applying it to your culture and to your job, whatever that looks like. Because we talk about it, coming from the arts perspective. We always have people that want to do lots of things in church where, they want painting and they want, dancing, all the things. And all of that is beautiful and can lead through worship. I love that. So I'm not doubting that or anything. But I do think it's interesting because if all of us bring our gifts to one service on a Sunday, it's going to look like the circus.
Totally.
And I'm wondering, is our gifts more important than people experiencing Jesus? And have we put our prophetic gifts and our need to be seen? Are we sure we're in the right alignment with Jesus being the main focus of people experiencing it?
You're just highlighting some other nuances. It's really good because I think if this conversation has a goal, one of my goals will be people that have a real passion for spiritual gifts to understand you're not the only one in the room. You might not even be leading the environment. So if you're going into your church or spiritual community and you're really frustrated the leaders aren't creating more space for you or for the gifts, you have to go, but you don't have the responsibility of leading the environment. You have no idea if that person is that leader or pastor actually doing it to the best of their abilities and to the best they feel like God is actually telling them to do that. And that's where it gets complex. And so you're just highlighting the other possibilities of what's going on instead of this place is against the gift and this place is for the gift. It's I think there's a lot more options than just those two.
Well, yeah. I mean, even coming and all of us moving into the South, all of us had to learn where the people are here, as far as the people that make up the church that we go to. I mean, it's going to be completely different than, say, in California or New York or some other city, right? So I think as a pastor, you have to know your sheep. And someone coming in and only seeing, their experience, they don't actually see the behind the scenes of what you are, the conversations you're having, you're navigating. And I think that's where I'm like, man, we speak so quickly into being like, oh, they don't allow the gifts, or they don't, allow God to move. And I'm like, wow, we don't actually have the whole picture. And if you say that you're a part of this community, allow the shepherd who actually does know the sheep a lot, actually let him pastor.
It's so funny because this last week we had baptisms.
Yeah.
And there was a particular family that their kids got baptized, and it's been this amazing journey for the kids. And the mom and the dad they had both of the kids do a voice note and send it to Candace and I why they're getting baptized. And it was so deeply moving. These weren't just kids I'm doing it because my friend. They were like, this is why I'm doing it. And they had such a clear why. It was really beautiful. And it just highlighted this reality of, I often hear people, even in our church today, say, I don't feel God. It feels like we're not X, Y, and Z. And then literally across the next people over are like, I have never experienced God. And so it's just okay, so who's right and who's wrong?
Yeah.
I think we have to keep in mind that when we talk about community, there's a lot of layers, there's a lot of dynamics, and we got to stop being so black and white about it. So if you're out there listening to this at this point, and you're so passionate about spiritual gifts, try to think outward instead of only you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of not being isolated. And so you can be in a community and still be isolated.
Yeah.
You can be in a family and still all be alone. And that's where that's what we're trying to break down that reality. And because we have a lot of lone rangers out there, and it really brings up prophets and spiritual gifts in the new covenant look different than it did before the cross.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask the question, and this was some of the comments we got this last week, what about Nehemiah? What about Isaac or Isaiah?
Yeah.
What about Ezekiel? And I said, totally, that was a very different role of a prophet. But when Jesus came, it shifted everything. Mm-hmm. And so there has to be room for a new framework for people to understand. And I think sometimes we grab these Old Testament prophets and we want to mimic their lives, or people do at least, and Lone Ranger, isolation, and all that. And I'm like, that's not what's happening in the New Covenant.
Yeah.
New Covenant is very different. And then you go, well, what's the role of the prophet? And this is where I'm still working out my own thing. In the Old Testament, you have prophet to nations. Mm-hmm. My question that I'm wrestling with today is, are there still prophets to nations? I know there's prophets in nations. I question or wonder, are there actual prophets to nations? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have a solid answer on that. And I think some people say, absolutely. I'm like, I don't know, maybe. But then, what seems clear to me in the New Covenant and the New Testament is one of the biggest roles of the prophet was to the local church. It was to the local church. And that's what I want to keep emphasizing. And because it's a major shift from just kind of not being mean at all, but just prophesying to nation, to kings and all that, and there was a place for that. But something seemed to shift into the new covenant. And it was not only, but a lot of the emphasis was to the local church.
Yeah.
It was to the early church. And so I feel like we need to kind of get back to that reality. And that's hard for some. And I get it, because some people are walking in these amazing gifts, and no church will accept them.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of the same coin. So how do we create these cultures? And so I think today there's really no formula. It's just like there's a lot of dynamics here, a lot of layers to this conversation.
Yeah, because we had this conversation in youth recently, because I think what we're seeing, especially in the charismatic movement, is that our gifts have become something that like we equate to, oh, that was a powerful service because I experienced God in X, Y, and Z. And we relate to speaking, oh, I felt something, and so therefore I know that that person was anointed. And it's all about how we feel, and there's no establishment of like going deep with God. And I that's where I think the gifts get a little kind of crooked, is because I feel like sometimes we value them so much that we forget that it was supposed to point us to Jesus. And even when we study the miracles, even when we study like the New Testament prophets, all of it was to get us closer to Jesus. And if that gets in the way of like, I need to speak, I think that scares me a little bit, because I'm like, if you're not pointing to Jesus, or you don't know how to stand down for a second so that Jesus can be worshiped or Jesus can be met, you know, that's where I'm like, that's where the local church, I think, is important for you to be in, or at least people in your community, so that they can say, hey, listen, like this moment kind of felt a little skewed, like that it was more important that your voice got heard instead of Jesus being seen or met. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's a tricky thing when spiritual gifts become your identity.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky thing when that transition's been made. Then that's a really tough thing, and because they don't feel like they are themselves unless they're operating in some gift.
Yeah.
And identity has to be deeper than that. It has to be, and sometimes our identity is connected to what we're feeling. So, you go to church or you go to some gathering and like, I didn't feel anything today.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean anything. You just didn't feel anything. But when we continue the sentence to, well, God wasn't there or this didn't happen, and oftentimes I think we're trying to have the same experience we had last week. So we're trying to just cycle through experiences, and I love experiences with God where you feel Him and it's clear. I love those. Beautiful. But my identity and my relationship can't be predicated or determined by just those experiences. And that's really hard for people in the charismatic streams and the Pentecostal streams, because there is a high emphasis on feeling and like literally feeling the presence of God. Yes. And like it's evident, there's weightiness, there's all these words that the charismatic movement used, the glory showing, the presence, the weighty presence, and all these terms and that are obviously in Scripture. But when for me, my challenge for people is when that becomes the dominant definition of what it means when God shows up, then you're going to try to recreate those experiences. And when you don't have those experiences, then you start to question everything. And
then you complain. And that's where the complaining attitude that I'm seeing a lot right now in churches is they come in and they don't feel like they have felt God or whatever, and so they start pointing it at people like, why didn't we do this? Because if we did this, then I would feel God. And my question is like, can we not go past that? Like, are we not going deeper? Because when I read the New Testament and I see these apostles and literally being beheaded, and they're seeing Jesus as they're being stoned, like I'm thinking like, I don't know about you, but I don't think that's an emotional goosebump moment. That's like pain, you know what I mean? Like till death, and they are still experiencing Jesus in those atmospheres. And so for me, it's like, can we have this conversation of, yes, the prophetic is important. Yes, the spiritual gifts is important. But can we go past that and use that as a way to meet Jesus and experience a deeper level of knowing him?
It's funny when you talk about, the apostle being beheaded. If you read what happened to the apostles, the disciples after Jesus ascended and disappeared, their deaths were brutal.
Brutal.
And it's amazing how much today people want to be apostles. I'm like, you really want to? I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I don't want to be boiled in a pot of oil on a fire while everybody's watching. I mean, I don't aspire to that. And so I think it's funny because I think we look at modern day quote prophets and apostles, and they just have huge followings. And I'm not discounting any of it, but I think the desire to be one of those is because of what the fame and the applause that comes with it. And I'm like, okay, forget modern day. Go back and look at the original. Their lives were very difficult.
Very.
So difficult.
Yeah.
And we're complaining about Wi-Fi not happening, and yet we think we can. And so it's I like having these conversations because I'm like, I think for years I was like, I want to be I want to be one of these guys. Now I'm like, I'm good.
I'm good.
I mean, if that's what happens, fine. But the aspiration is no longer there because we don't realize what we are actually desiring, and so.
Yeah, this is probably going to get me in trouble a little bit, this statement, but when you train this is going to sound really bad. I shouldn't probably go here, but I'm going to do it. But if you train a dog, you can actually train them to, like, for a whistle or to do things like, if I laugh because we have some friends that have a bell on their door, and if they need to go out, the dog hits it and they know, like, hey, open the door. And I feel like sometimes we have limited even God today, like, into what we've experienced or like what we've trained ourselves to experience him in. And I think that's what I love about being a part of this community, and why my husband and my family made the trip to come here was because of your leadership and the fact of you were going after experiencing God in the everyday and having these questions of what it is to bring God into culture. And if we don't have those conversations, then I think the church will become irrelevant, that people will leave. I mean, we're already seeing the masses leave, but if we're able to teach and to have these hard questions and say, hey, there was pain in this, and that's because of the lack of care. It doesn't mean that it isn't powerful, it isn't needed, but we need that character to match it. I think that's what's going to start bringing the people back into, I can still be in a relationship with God. And yes, this was painful or this hurt, but this is allowing me to come back into relationship with him. So I feel like these conversations are really, really important, but that's why I'm like, that's why we're here, is because you had the guts to have these conversations. So. Yeah,
I think sounds like we're kind of wrapping up this episode,
yes.
But I think that to kind of round up some thoughts is this conversation around spiritual gifts, this conversation around whether they're alive or not today, and church cultures and leadership. I think what I would love for people to embrace the idea is that there's so many layers and dimensions to the conversation. Yeah. It's not black and white. It's not this or that. It's so many layers to it. There's so many dynamics, and so I think that's why we keep going. You brought it up again, the character part of us.
Yeah.
I think I'll spend probably a lot of the rest of my life just emphasizing that. Yeah. Because, this last week, some more stuff has popped up, in a whole nother situation, not connected to studio, but a whole nother situation. And it's just the dysfunction and unhealth of the leadership that is creating incredible message in their environment.
Yeah.
And there were so many opportunities for there to be course correction, so many opportunities for it to be addressed. And years have gone by, and it's blowing up right now. And it's like, it's fascinating that we seem to be more okay with dysfunctional leaders than we do about talking about character.
Yeah.
And, we haven't talked about women preachers, women in ministry, which I think I want to talk about that at some point.
Yes.
And
me too.
I think that would be a fun future episode. But I was talking to Erwin about this, and I said, what do you think about women in leadership and ministry? And he said, it's fascinating that we'd rather have dysfunctional male leadership than actually have women in leadership. It's like, that's a really good point. And so I think the whole emphasis of character
Yeah.
and just really paying attention to that and just understanding narcissism is a really big conversation that it everywhere. I mean, everyone now I think we're misdiagnosing. Oh, narcissist. I'm like,
Everyone
okay,
is.
hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like we are kind of misdiagnosing, but I appreciate the fact that there's a highlight on the internal workings of humans and specifically Christian leaders.
Yeah.
And that's why the character conversation, I think, needs to continually be emphasized, because we have definitely seen spiritual gifts with lack of character is really destructive.
Yeah.
And that I don't ever want to forget that. That is a real reality, and it's still happening today. And so that's why there's so much going on here, and I think we can do better. And I want to do better. I want all of us to do better.
Yeah. I think that also, and I'll put it on us, I think that's a lot of us have put unhealthy maybe standards for leaders as well, thinking that they have to always have the answer. And I think it's caused a pressure for leaders to never be able to question. And I think what was interesting, the most comments I got from the latest podcast that we did was it allowed me to have the freedom to ask questions. And I think that's beautiful, is if we can create an atmosphere where even leaders can say, hey, I'm wrestling with this and I don't know the answer to it, and being okay with that. So
Yeah.
I like
And for
this.
people that are very passionate about spiritual gifts, what I would encourage them is like have room to have conversation to see other perspectives.
Wow.
And if it's really true, it will stand. I believe truth will stay standing at the end of time.
Yeah.
I just believe that. I believe if it's really true, it will remain.
Yeah.
If it's not, then
It will
and so
disappear.
I think for people that are just like very black and white, whether you're for the gifts, hey, gain some other perspective. Listen to why it's a big conversation. And then for people that don't believe the spiritual gifts are for today, I think I would encourage you should also expand your perspective on the other side of the other angles. But just staying camped out is not going to help you in the long run.
No.
So anyway, those are some, I think we just need to continue to expand our conversation. And that's what we're trying to do with this talk.
Yeah. I love that.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
that was
we
good.
did it. It was a great conversation. Again, we love your comments.
Yep.
We do.
Amen, met Shayna.
Yes. I know you guys all aimed them at Eric last time. I was kind of a little sad, so I felt like I needed to be a little spicier this time. Anyways,
I did say something that
did.
merited some comments.
you did. And you posted them on your social, which I love. So anyways, all right. Have a great day, everyone.
Yes.